I'm going to kick the event off now with our keynote speaker, which is John McDonald, the CEO of ClearObject. ClearObject has been designated as the fastest growing IT company in Indiana for the last 4 years. They know a lot about the Internet of Things, which you hear about in just a minute. John's a national speaker, and we're thrilled to have him here today just to speak with you all. And I'm just going to, you can read more about John in the program, and I'll just turn it over to John.
Thank you for saving everybody from the normal introduction that I get, which was written by my mother. So it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Greetings from, just got back from Florida. Brought the weather with me. You're welcome. I was there last week as well and brought back not enough in my carry-on bag because it faded out over the weekend. So I brought more this time. Great to see you all today. I want to kind of explain a couple things going on in this world around us. That's me. Hey. There are 5 levels of autonomous vehicles or cars that drive themselves. Level 1 is in most people's vehicle. It's cruise control. Set the speed and it stays at that speed. Level 2, best representation, is adaptive cruise control, where you have the sort of radar that'll keep the speed in front of you from sort of creeping up, or automatic braking, where it'll stop if you're about to go to a brick wall. Level 3 could best be thought of as steering cruise control. So you can kind of take your hand off the wheel for a little while and it won't veer off into the ditch, right? So instead of, if you're like rooting for something in your bag down here, no, you can take your hand off the wheel and kind of grab something and then go back. That's in fairly high-end vehicles now, a lot of them. Level 4 cars can be pre-programmed to drive themselves from one location to another without driver input and fail safely. As in, there's a roadblock ahead, the car will stop and wait for driver input. And level 5 autonomous vehicles have no steering wheel. So where do you think we're at, by the way, in this sort of level thing? Anybody guess? 4? 4 or 5? Yeah, Ford Motor Company and GM and actually all the major manufacturers have vowed to have available for sale a level 4 autonomous vehicle in the 2021 model year. What year is it? Wrong. It's 2019 in the automobile industry. So that's actually 2 years from now. You're going to be able to walk into the local Ford dealer and buy a car that can be pre-programmed to drive itself from one location to another and fail safely. And because cars only last somewhere between 4 and 8 years, it means that somewhere between 2 and 4 years for half the vehicles on the marketplace to have any given technology because they just wear out. So if you don't think we're getting autonomous vehicles, you're mistaken. So what happens in a world where all the vehicles can be pre-programmed to drive themselves from one location to another and fail safely? Well, a lot of things change. First of all, we need a lot less roads. One of the main reasons we have so many roads is because we can only react so quickly as drivers to the things that are happening in front of us. But as any IndyCar driver will tell you, that the best way to save on energy is to run them bumper to bumper. So, and if you are being controlled by computers, you can do that. Another thing you can do is you don't have to run them at 65 miles an hour. You can run them at 200 miles an hour, which means you could go to Chicago for lunch. And if you don't think that that's already happening, this is called the Virginia Smart Road. It's an actual freeway that has been built in the hills of Virginia where they are testing autonomous vehicles at 200 miles an hour on a closed road system. It will eventually be connected at both sides to the actual interstate highway. It will be the first place in America where not only will you be allowed to drive autonomously, it'll be required to drive autonomously. Apply that idea to delivering products. So let's say you go on Amazon's website and you put in your information and you order a t-shirt. And this vehicle shows up at the end of your street. What's coming out of the top of it, by the way? Can anybody see that up front? It's a drone. That's probably how drones will be used. It probably won't be fair and clear across Indianapolis. Very fraught with legal problems. So this vehicle will likely pull up. That's not a mock-up, by the way. That's an actual autonomous UPS truck. And drop a box on your doorstep with the t-shirt you ordered. So you open up the box, and inside you pull the t-shirt out, and it's the wrong size. So you put it back in the box, go back to Amazon, click a few things. 15 minutes later, another one of these guys comes out. The drone comes over, picks up the old box, puts a new one on your doorstep with the right size t-shirt. In that world, you don't need stores. And if you don't think that this is already happening, think about all of the retail operations that have either gone bankrupt or shut down more than 600 locations in the last 6 months. It's already happening. Apply that idea to hospitals. Some of you from hospitals, right? Okay. Look out. What's one of the main reasons why we have clinics in hospitals? Answer is to get access to equipment that's difficult to move and people that know how to use it. So what if I needed to get an MRI on my knee, and instead of going to an imaging center, a vehicle rolls up in front of my house? I punch a code in the door pops open, and I'm greeted by this scene. Nobody in there. Right? Sit down, push a button. On the left screen comes the world-renowned expert in managing MRI machines, and on the right-hand side comes a world-renowned expert in interpreting MRI results. Hold still, Mr. McDonald. Okay, we now know what's wrong with your knee. In about 15 minutes from now, we're going to send out another vehicle that has a brace that we want you to put on this side, and somebody else is going to bring out some medication, and just close the door behind you and walk back inside. In that world, you don't need hospitals. Apply that idea to autonomous recreational vehicles, which sounds incredibly frivolous. But if I wanted to go to Chicago for a meeting tomorrow, and that's kind of a pain in the butt, I would have to pack a bag, roll it out to my car, drive the car to Chicago, get a new battery for my microphone, drive the car to Chicago. Here, you do this. I'm going to yell while you fix that.
Keep yelling.
All right. It maybe go to the airport, go through the TSA, or maybe just drive to downtown Chicago, park in some parking garage, haul the bag into the lobby. What a pain in the butt. What if instead my hotel room came and picked me up tonight and drove me to Chicago? And I checked in just by walking out of my house to the curb, and it drove me there and it allowed me to sleep while it took me to my meeting tomorrow. In that world, you don't need Hilton. You don't need Hertz. You don't need Southwest Airlines. In fact, during the course of this event today, several unfortunate Americans will lose their lives in traffic accidents. And there will come a time, not so far away, that we will realize that all of those accidents are preventable. In fact, you are the unsafe factor in driving. This will probably begin on some back road in Montana from, say, 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. It will be automated only. In other words, you won't be allowed to be driving on that road with your hands on the wheel. And that will later be extended to include probably all interstate highways and then maybe all state highways. And the truth is, it'll probably be forever before we actually completely lose any sense of a steering wheel, because it'll still be difficult to maneuver a delivery truck through Manhattan, right? But in most driving conditions, for most people, most of the time, you will be in a situation where you will not have to have your hands on the wheel, and in some cases will be prohibited from doing so. Another way to look at this is to think of it this way. The average American spends 101 minutes a day driving. A little less here in Indiana, a little more in places like California, but on average that's true. You will have your driver's license for about 61 years before your grandchildren take it away from you. That means over the course of your lifetime, you will spend 37,935 hours of your life watching road reflectors zip by. There are 221.7 million registered drivers in America, which means in sum total, we will collectively spend 8.4 trillion hours driving. And we're about to get all that time back. It's the biggest one-time leap in human productivity ever. And that, friends, is just cars. If you apply those same concepts to everything that you interact with in your daily life, the material you use at a factory, the car that you drive, the appliances in your home, everything that you touch and see and manipulate as a device, you only begin to start to scratch the surface, thank you very much, on why this microphone didn't say that it had a low battery and got one for itself. You only begin to scratch the surface of what is about to happen to all of us in this world as the very devices that we interact with become smart and start sending data about how we're using them. So why is this happening? The first reason is the explosion in software in everyday devices. The Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor, which was a device largely conceived of in the late 1970s, has 1.7 million lines of software code in it, a significant amount of software for the time. If you fast forward to the late 1990s, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner has about 6.5 million lines of software code in it. But the 2018 Mercedes-Benz S-Class 550 has 20 million lines of software code in it, 14 million of which are in the radio alone. Which means it is the most sophisticated computing device most people will touch in their daily lives and has to boot successfully in 2 seconds every time you turn the power on. That is an immense amount of intelligence in a device that when I was in high school was a silver box with 2 knobs. Right? And that device is representative of what's happening in all devices, in all parts of that vehicle, and in all things that are going on that roll or move. In fact, Elon Musk is famous for saying we're not a car company, we're actually a rolling computer company. And I'm about to make a pretty audacious assertion here, that data that is coming from those everyday devices is so important, it is actually the great creator and destroyer of all business value going forward. The new economy is based on that data, and the winners and losers will be decided based on how you use and leverage that data, which is an audacious statement, but let me back it up. The entire history of the internet to this point has been about being an internet of people. Everything that has been about the internet has been making me a smarter endpoint to connect to the internet. My body has 5 senses in it. This iPhone has 12. All of which are basically designed to make me a smarter endpoint to the internet. This device is actually quite stupid if you're not connected to the internet. When I flew back from Florida yesterday, the first thing that this iPhone did when I landed in Indy was reset its internal clock. It can't even keep time well. And if this thing isn't connected to the internet, do any of these apps really do anything on this phone? We say we carry around all of human knowledge in our pocket, but the truth is there actually is really very little on this phone, because all of it has been residing in this cloud. But the role of the cloud is changing from a place where all the data and applications are at to a place where only selected data goes to be understood. And to understand that context, we have to sort of go back to a little bit of the beginning of the history of computing. The first major era of the use of computers in the 1960s, 1980s to automate business tasks was hallmarked by these large computers we called mainframes, and these dumb terminals. They weren't just dumb, they were stupid. They had no function other than to send a keystroke to this big machine in some other room and to display a character that came back. Their best function was to heat up your office. But then starting in the 1980s, we started to shift computing power out to the edge. We gave people first PCs and then laptops, and we started sending that data and information out to the edge of the network. To be fair, though, there were a few problems we never really solved, like do you have access to the right data? Should you be seeing that data? How do I keep you from stealing that data on a floppy disk and carrying it away with you? And so what we did was, starting in about 2000, we started re-centralizing all the data onto the new form of the mainframe, the cloud, and the new form of dumb terminal, a mobile device. But all of that information and data and smarts and things like car radios is causing a back to the future moment. Because now what's happening is we are reshifting all the data and intelligence back out to the edge again. This time not in the form of PCs, but in the form of everyday devices. And that means that the role of the cloud changes from being the place where all the data and information goes to a place where only selected data is going to be understood and interpreted and acted upon. And that powerful concept, as I said, is nothing less than the 4th major shift in how our global economy is organized, which again is like, that's an audacious statement too, but let me back it up. The first one was agrarian, organized farming. You farm so that I don't have to farm. Prior to that, everybody had to farm, to eat, and hunt and gather. But then when we got organized farming, then there was only a certain group of people, farmers, that did that for us, and we bought their products in the marketplace. Second organizing structure was the Industrial Revolution, organizing making things. Now you go make things in a factory, so I don't have to make things. Prior to that, everybody had to make everything that the table they sat at, the bowl they ate out of, the house they were in, right? But after the Industrial Revolution, you could make things and buy those products in a marketplace. The third organized structure happened relatively recently, and so that it's difficult for some to see it because it was pretty recent. And that is a revolution in how you move things. This happened shortly after World War II. It's when we got containers for shipping overseas. We got jet air transport, interstate highways. All of these things happened shortly after World War II and became effortless to move things around the planet. When I ordered this iPhone, I got a shipping notice from the factory in China and was able to track it as it moved, planes, trains, and automobiles across the planet to my doorstep, which is something that would have been completely impossible just 10 years ago. But now the new economy is based on data, and the data is the great destroyer and creator of all value. And to illustrate this point, the company with the largest number of hotel rooms up for grabs is not Hilton, or it's actually Airbnb. But what's interesting about it is Airbnb doesn't own any hotels. The world's biggest retailer is Alibaba, which is essentially the Amazon of China. But they don't have any stores. The world's biggest broadcaster is Netflix, and they don't have any TV studios or stations or broadcast towers. I guess they have studios now, but they don't have towers or broadcast. And the world's biggest car rental company is Uber, and they don't own any cars. These aren't up-and-comers. These are the biggest in each one of their categories, and they don't actually have any of the assets that hallmarked all their predecessors. What do they have? You know the answer to this question. Data. That's exactly right. Uber knows very little about you. They know that you're standing on a street corner, and they know you need to go from A to B. They know your credit card number, and as I like to joke, they know even less about their drivers. But using that data alone, they were able to build a multi-billion-dollar business. What if they knew more? This is already impacting businesses around here. Rolls-Royce here in Indianapolis makes jet engines. Curious? Why do they make jet engines in Indianapolis? I thought they were a UK company. Well, one of the reasons why is because the team here in Indianapolis pioneered an idea called Power by the Hour. And in this model, Delta Airlines is phasing out owning jet engines, which is odd. They're an airline. Instead, what they do is they pay Rolls-Royce for power by the hour. They pay Rolls-Royce for jet engine service. So it's up to Rolls-Royce to have 2 working engines on that plane before it backs up from the gate. And if they have to strap 14 of them on there before they find 2, that's on Rolls-Royce, not on Delta. This is good for Delta because it becomes an expense that they can manage to, and great for Rolls-Royce because it becomes a recurring revenue stream out of something that was once just a purchase and forget. But that means that the data coming from these engines is really, really important because Rolls-Royce needs to know how those engines are performing. And knowing whether or not it's going to fail or not, and doing predictive failure analysis is the difference between profit or loss that month for Rolls-Royce in that business unit. In fact, you could argue that the data is actually more important than the engine itself, because if Rolls-Royce got really, really good at that, they could actually provide that service for engines that they didn't even make. In fact, you could see a day when Rolls-Royce phased out of making engines and only did power by the hour service for aircraft engines made by somebody else. So the data is an extremely powerful motivator in that business model. Another example, Cummins engine makes diesel engines. And these are very finicky, particularly in the area of emissions. You can run up and down a mountain or into a dry area or a wet area and they'll get out of whack. And when they do, the EPA will make them do what's called derating the engine, which is bad for the fleet operators, right? And so when these things start happening, the engine will start to throw fault codes that would turn on the check engine light in your car. But the truck driver doesn't know what these mean. The fleet operator barely does, but Cummins does. And so whenever one of these fault codes occurs, within 1 minute of that fault code happening, the fleet operator gets a message that lets him know what that fault code means and what to do about it. Pull over and stop. Wait till the next exit. Wait till the next service interval. In fact, Cummins can even pre-roll the parts through their internal network and intercept the truck at the nearest Cummins care facility to get it back on the road faster. So Cummins is winning a huge amounts of business from this. And what's interesting about that is they used to win business based on traditional measurements in the engine business, like torque, right, and reliability. Instead, they're winning it on the data stream. In fact, just like in the Rolls-Royce example, Cummins could, if they got very good at this, do this for other engines that they didn't even make, or even other parts of the truck that are not even the engine. thus creating entire new business models for them. This is one of my favorite ones. The biggest impact potentially for IoT actually may be in the first of those organizing structures, which is the agrarian structure. A farm today is not unlike a factory floor that happens to be outside. And what's interesting about this is we very rarely know very much about that factory floor. We will take an aerial photograph of it and then at the beginning of the season, at the end of the season, and try and infer from it how we should be seeding and planting things and manage the land better. That's sort of like if I had an automotive factory, before the first shift in April, I took a picture of it before all the workers showed up. And then in October, at the end of the summer, after they all left, I took a second picture and used that to infer how I did making automobiles. It's kind of the same situation. It's very unmanaged. And so what we're learning through initial experiments in automated farming is a few things that challenge the status quo, like you've been told all of your life not to mow your lawn or to water the grass in the bright hot sunlight of the middle of the summertime, right? But we've been farming in the middle of the bright hot sunlight ever since there've been farming because we had to see. But if it's being done by automated vehicles, we're actually learning that it's better for the plants to do it at night, which makes a lot of sense. So there is experimentation going on with creating vehicles that are designed to move between the rows of corn, stop, sample the soil, spray the appropriate amount of chemicals and water on that spot to mitigate issues, and roll on and do it the same thing again 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Most of the yield gains in agriculture over the last quarter century have been chemical. But now we can manage the chemicals so much more and apply things instead of spraying them across an entire field, spray them in a very small area and use a lot less chemicals and get a lot better yield out of them. And instrument the factory floor, the floor being the field itself. So what are some of the implications of the fact that the data world is changing the physical world? What changes elsewise in our world around us as a result of this? Well, one of the first questions I get all the time is about jobs. John, what about all the truck drivers? If all of them are being automated and driven across, by computers, what are we doing with all of those jobs? Well, it's very likely that even if you have a bunch of trucks sort of ganged up and connected with each other like over-the-road trains, that you still need to have people managing and monitoring that over-the-road train. But their role changes from someone to having hands on the wheel to something more like a conductor of a train as it moves across the landscape. In fact, this is an actual cab in a recent truck show that was designed for the world that I'm describing. You can see there's sort of a little couch over here, there are screens around it, and yes, there is a little wheel there, almost like a fighter pilot if I need to maneuver something around. But this is a cab for a truck driver who does very little driving, right, and is more monitoring the system as it rolls across the road. And that's an example of what's likely to happen with a whole range of jobs where they don't necessarily go away. It just may mean that there are less of them because it takes less manual labor to do it, and the ones who are doing it are going to have to change to be more like system monitors and managers of a system than active participants in it. Second thing that changes pretty radically is education. This chart is from the Kaufman Institute, which is a great group that tracks a lot of stuff related to entrepreneurialism, and it's a graph of the adult population that owns a business as their primary job based on education level. The black line at the top are college graduates, and the teal line at the bottom are less than a high school diploma. Over the last 4 years, do you see what's happening? The percentage of people with a college education that own businesses is collapsing, whereas the number of businesses that are owned by less than a high school diploma has exploded by 300%. What is that? That is our own kids, like you, and my own children that are in high school saying, I can code a website, I can build an app. I don't even necessarily need a high school diploma to be able to do that. And I certainly don't really need a college education to do it. What it really is it's an early indicator that the system that we set up for education, which was designed to turn out farm workers and factory workers, is going to need to change to turn out data workers. Because our hyper-connected kids are already seeing that the skills that they're learning in that setting are not necessarily applicable to the kind of skills and roles that they want to have that are needed today. Security. Lots of people always ask me, well, when does it, become like Skynet? Like, when does it start, becoming sentient and beaming people out of the sky? So one of the ways that I describe this is to help us understand the difference between real versus perceived security issues. There's a whole bunch of things in our world that we have created a whole bunch of technology to cover off on a perceived security issue instead of a real one. We can create all kinds of technologies to manage to real security issues, but perceived ones are very difficult to handle. Example of this is this. Let's say you ordered that book on Amazon, and you get to that screen where you're typing in your credit card number at the end, and you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, right? As you put the numbers in, you're like, it's Amazon, it's safe, but maybe not so safe. So you decide that feeling in the pit of your stomach is actually that you're hungry. And so you go to a restaurant, and you order up your meal, and then when the waiter comes to the check, you hand him your credit card with all the little numbers on the back and your signature, and he walks away for like 5 minutes, right? And you don't think anything of it. What's the difference between these two things? Well, the difference is that humans cannot trust computers, at least not yet. Humans can only trust other humans. And so even though it's fleeting and all this simplistic, in that moment with a waiter, you develop an interpersonal human bond. So that if you get an errant charge on your credit card next month, your mind immediately goes to, it was the waiter. So which of these two systems, Amazon or the waiter, is more secure? Amazon, obviously, but your mind perceives it as exactly the opposite. And so we cannot create enough technology to cover off on perception issues, but we can create all kinds of technologies to secure your credit card at Amazon and hold them responsible if they don't. And the best example of this is the TSA. It's a massive system designed to cover off on a perceived security issue. Does anybody think that I can't put some plastique in this rubber sole of this shoe and walk right through these things and blow up a plane? Yet we have this massive technological system we're spending all this money on to cover off on making us feel more secure. Ironically, what's the best way to stop an armed gunman on an airplane from taking down an airplane? The answer is arm everybody. Right? If everybody on the airplane had a gun, that guy's not going to get very far, right? So yet we take all the guns because it makes us feel safer. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating arming everybody on an airplane, but you understand the rhetorical point, right? We have to create systems that cover off on real security issues, not just perceived ones. And also to illustrate this, I'll use an old example. Let's say you're driving down the road in your car, and your car notices that you're not keeping your lane as effective as you did about 15 minutes ago. And it's 3 in the morning, and it thinks you might be tired. So it also knows that 2 exits up is 24-hour Starbucks, and you like chai lattes. So on the car radio comes the message, would you like a chai latte? And you say yes or no. And it beams your payment information ahead and orders the coffee, and you go through the drive-thru and pick it up, the car thus having saved its own life as well as yours. Now you know that there's 14 million lines of software code in every radio, and if your car was made less than 5 years ago, I can tell you with great confidence that your car can do what I just said. To which people will ask me the question, well, why does my car not order me coffee, John? And the answer is because you don't want it to. Who else do you not want to know that you're weaving in your lane at 3 in the morning?
Law enforcement.
Yes? Your insurance company? Your wife? Right? And if you can go over that, like, who else wants that data? Well, Dunkin' Donuts wants that data. Hilton has a hotel room at the next exit they didn't sell it last night, and they want to sell it to you half price. Right, so you shut it off. What's the first thing you do when you find that an app is sending data about your location? Yeah, you either shut it off or you delete it, right? And this is because we are stealing it from you. The reason why consumer IoT is so much farther behind industrial IoT is because we have not created the mechanisms to give you control over your data stream and enfranchise you in the value that it is created by it. The best example of this is that Google bought this company called Nest a few years ago, Nest thermostats. How many of you have a Nest thermostat in your room? Okay, a couple of you, very, very few. Usually this is because it's expensive, and also because people are like, I don't really want Google knowing when I come and go in my house. But if you were able to control how Google used that data, and more importantly, Google paid you for it, like if you got a check at the end of the month from Google Corporation for getting that data, you might have a very different opinion about whether or not you should have a Nest thermometer on your wall. So what we need to do is enfranchise people in the data stream and give them control over it that doesn't necessarily exist in the industrial setting. And about that. Today, what is happening is companies are just beginning to try and figure out how they can start to build the digital product around their physical product. As I like to say, we're in the arms dealer phase of IoT. We're slinging guns at people who want to fight wars, and some of them shouldn't be handling weaponry. And what's happening oftentimes is there are sort of 4 disciplines that are necessary to transform a business in an IoT space. Discipline 1 is ideation, good design. You have to start with that. And then the second thing is that gets translated into some sort of edge technology, the sensors and networks that I have. Oftentimes I already have them. Third element is code that has to go in the device or around the device to be able to manage it. And the last one is the cloud itself, where all the data and the code goes. These 4 elements are required every time. I can vouch for that as a company that does this every time. And most companies are struggling to pull those 4 elements together. They oftentimes will say, well, look, you run servers in IT, so you must know about clouds. And you develop software, although it's not the software I'm talking about. And they try to bolt these elements together and do it on their own, and often skipping the first one, which is good ideation and design. And then they end up with a system that looks like a bunch of developers designed it, which is to say not that great, right? And so bringing these 4 elements together is what is required every time. And oftentimes there are people inside of organizations that see what's happening to the world around us and compare it to what's going on in their own company, and they're not amused. In fact, some of them are panicked, right? Some of them have struggled to bring these pieces together and make something of it and are failing. Maybe you're one of those people. But those 4 things are required to bring a data product around a physical product. And that data product is, for all intents and purposes, the future of your company or organization. And if you don't believe me after listening to all of this presentation, you're mistaken. That means you have to go back and create data products around your physical products in order to make those products relevant in the global marketplace. If Cummins Engine didn't have that ability to sell engines with that data and their competitor did, how long do you think Cummins Engine will be able to continue to sell engines? If Rolls-Royce didn't develop a product powered by the hour, how long would Rolls-Royce be able to continue to make jet engines if a competitor somewhere else on the planet did? It's just that important. So you're either going to do this and be the victor of the Internet of Things, or you'll end up being the victim. And I hope you will all be the victors. Thanks for listening today. Have fun the rest of the event.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is John Masco. John is the founder and CEO of Vanco Ag Technologies. John's going to talk about the connected field from the subsurface to the stratosphere. John has spent the majority of his career on ag technologies as well as precision agriculture, and I think you're going to find this very interesting in the things that he's going to talk to us about today. So we're getting him re-mic'd in just a moment.
It's a pleasure to be here and for Jill and NineStar to ask me to come up and speak. I'm going to take a little bit of different approach than what John did. I'm kind of going back to where things are from the standpoint that I've been spending the last 20 years in technology and agriculture and helping break down some barriers and making that transition. And I wanted to share some things about some of the experiences and just kind of some of the observations and where we are going and what we need to be looking at. And from a standpoint, from a show of hands, how many people here are actively involved in agriculture? They're farming, they're doing something other than eating. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring this perspective about where we are. What's it all about, the IoT for agriculture? And what is IoT for agriculture about? It's about pie. It's about what is it easy as pie? What is involved with it? And it's all about, in the next so many years, we've got to feed 10 billion people. Right now we're at 7.6 billion people, and we have to increase production in order to meet that demand for food. And that's part of John's talk about growing things. We are going to have to be doing more with less. We have less land to farm, less arable land. We're going to have less fresh water for irrigation. We're going to have less production resources, fertilizer, chemicals, seed, things that are going to be coming on that we're using today. We're going to have less trained labor and management. We have an exodus to some extent of knowledgeable people to work in the ag side. We don't have the resources or the people to support the technologies trying to be adopted in ag. We have a vacuum there. Oops. We're all going to be asked to do more for improved food security. People want to know what's going on with their food. Where is it coming from? What happens when a salmonella outbreak happens with eggs? Where's the traceability? That goes back to the eggs. And I forgot on the food security, how far are we driving to bring the food to us? And sustainability. All of the impacts that we're having in agriculture today, are we putting more nitrates in the soil because we're over-fertilizing? Are we using more pesticides than what we need? How are we working with those things? It's all about the new toys and tools. As John was alluding to, we have autonomous tractors right now and that are operating in the fields. Whoops. There's nobody on them. They're set out in the field, they're planting, they're tilling, they're harvesting, they're working with it from that standpoint. There's nobody on there. We have drones that are flying through the fields now. As you can tell, if I can get it here, they're taking pictures and images. We have some future looks to where they're going to be going out in the field pulling tissue samples, soil samples independently. They operate independently now with GPS. And when it gets down to it, it's all about collecting, analyzing, and delivering actionable information near real time from the field to the fork in a manner that's scalable. Because when we are out trying to manage thousands of acres, it's very easy to do a quarter acre, but when you try and manage that large acreage out and getting it scalable, getting it economically viable, it's very difficult. And that's one of the biggest barriers that we've been experiencing in this adoption curve that we have. This right here is some technologies that we have setting out. This is a tomato plants down in South Carolina where we're monitoring the soil in near real time, knowing what the movement of the moisture and the fertilizer is through the soil profile. We're looking at the plant itself. We're looking at what are the disease conditions. What's the temperature? What's the humidity? What's the time that leaf is wet? Because we're trying to use predictiveness to know what's going on. We have to predict the onset of disease so we can spray just in time. Then we're pushing up, as I call, the magic cloud. And we have to compute. We have to have the cloud computing capabilities. And then we have to push it to people and things to tell us what's going on so we can make actionable information. Do we turn a valve on to irrigate? Do we spray? What do we do? It's all about managing the variability. For people that are in agriculture, this is what a field looks like. This is how much variability, the differences in soil conditions in this crop. This is a satellite image that goes through and it tells us that we have poor growing conditions in the red areas. Can we manage it differently? And with today's technologies, what's the size of our management zone? These little black lines here are soil structures. It's the different soils in a field, and that's the variabilities. Because you can overwater in sand and underwater in a heavy clay soil, but its potentials are there. And these are the things we're dealing with today in trying to manage this part of it. Being able to do this effectively is key, and we have seen a lot of good results so far. It's all about challenging the traditional incremental improvement. And this is the thing I found kind of interesting. I'm going to take just a little bit on this one. What we have here is that these are the years in 10-year increments in our corn and our average yield over that 10-year period. And you can see from the mid-30s, we've made incremental changes in our yield improvement by feeding, by adopting some things. And once you take a look at the key innovations that occurred, we have introduction of hybrids. That's a crossbred. It used to be open pollinated corn that the farmer saved every year and replanted it. And it open pollinated. Then we went to hybridizations where we did genetic changes that were done in the field. And we had a significant raise in our yield response. We increased 16 bushel, 43% from the 37. And then over that 2-decade period, we had a pretty good move. And this is the one that, for some of the farmers that are here, is back in the late 50s, early 60s, we had introduced nitrogen. And then we had herbicides coming into effect. We had atrazine come in to help farmers farm the ground and do a better job to work with them. And this was significant. This was a significant impact to the Green Revolution. That's when Earl Butz got us that we're going to raise border to border on our corn because we have an export market. And then come here where we have the introduction of GMOs, genetically modified crops, where they breed them, they design them to be drought tolerant, to be tolerant to insects and tolerant. And the yield improvement over this years wasn't as significant, and it's actually going down in the last 10 years of the results from this. These management pieces here were much more impactful than these last 40 years that we've seen here. And this is where the Internet of Things is going to make a big change that we're seeing right now. We're managing the crops differently. We use this to help save us time in the field by spraying a herbicide-tolerant crop. But did we get the type of return that we were expecting? It's all about, with the Internet of Things, is that it allows us to gather the data in near real time and maintain that data over years. A farmer has an opportunity to put out a crop about 30 to 40 times in his lifetime. And I know we're talking about now with the farmers. I remember in 2003, I think it was, we had similar weather conditions, but I don't know exactly what they were. With the Internet of Things and collecting the data, we're able to keep that data and refer back to it in an ongoing basis through the computing side, looking at relational databases of what happened. When the temperature was X, how did the crop grow in that season? When we had this much water, when the insect pressure was such. When did we get it planted? And that's the type of thing the Internet of Things by cloud computing allows us to keep the metadata on soil conditions, satellite imagery to know what the plant canopy looks like. What hybrids did we plant? When did we harvest it? And keeping track of all those things. And by repeating those successful production practices, we can be more consistent in what we're producing. And the industry is concentrating on delivering the 4 R's. It's not reading, writing, arithmetic, and running, but it's about getting the right source, matching the fertilizer for the crop needs. It's doing a crop phenology, knowing what the crop needs at a particular growth stage and what nutrient does it need. It's about the right rate. How much of that nutrient does that crop need? And when does it need it? Then it comes back to the right time. During the growth cycle of a corn plant, we need nitrogen later in the season when we can't get out to the field. But can we manage that differently? And the right place. We apply things above the soil, but what if we were able to apply below the soil? These are the types of technologies that the Internet of Things allows us to do real-time management in a good fashion that's sustainable. It's about innovation to deliver the potential. And this is the type of stuff that I've been working with here that is very applicable here in central Indiana. It is putting systems to where we can deliver moisture or nutrients subsurfacely to the plant roots during the growing season. That's being able to matching the delivery of the crop needs when it needs it. And this is something that it's in effect today. These are things that are happening today. It's all about breaking barriers. This past year, if you notice that we had 157 bushel average in 158 bushel average in Hancock County in 2017. This year in South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, North Carolina, we were able to achieve 350 bushel per acre. That's 190 bushel yield improvement in 1 year because we implemented the technologies that are available to us. That's delivering the nutrients where they're required, at the time that they're required, and it's 122 about what can we do. This is what we are doing. And here in central Indiana, we can do this. So it's all about the pie. And when I'm talking about pie, I'm looking at our pie isn't the same size. It's about people. We need people that are going to be working in the industry that are there to support it and help make that transition and break down the barriers. It's about innovation. It's about using the technologies. It's about the high schoolers coming in and looking at that agriculture. It's fun. It can be more sexy than some of the other technologies that are out there because you're doing some really cool stuff with it. You're able to make a difference because we have to meet that demand of 10 billion people in the next several years. And it's about creating an environment. It's an environment of taking some risk. It's an environment of trying things. It's an environment of education. It's an environment of excellence. It's trying to achieve much more than what the standard quo has been over the last several years. And it's all about making our pie bigger because what's happened in agriculture, we are only able to grow so much. And so everybody's trying to get more of a slice. And what we have to do is we have to make the pie bigger. And that's what happens when we see those type of yield results and we're able to make things work that way. With that, thank you very much. There you go.
Thank you, John. All of our speakers are John, so George, your name is now John.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is George Plazinski. He is an employee of NineStar Connect, and he is the manager of telecom operations. George is talking today because he handles the engineering, construction, and installation of all of our fiber assets at NineStar Connect in all of our territories. And when you're talking fiber, you're talking lots of data and lots of connectivity. So George is going to talk today about how the IoT impacts the utility industry and how we're using all this data, and as well as maybe even highlight some areas that are primed for more innovation and more solutions. So good timing. So with that,
I will in a second.
here's George. Oh, he's going to swap out our technology, and he promises to put it back.
Kind of like most of those in the engineering, I'm much more comfortable behind a desk, behind a computer screen, so this is my happy compromise with Jill. All right, like I said, I am George Plazinski. I'm the manager of telecom operations here at NineStar Connect, and we're going to talk a little bit about IoT in the utility space. Many of you may or may not be familiar with NineStar Connect. Obviously, we're kind of a unique animal out there since we are a communications utility, an electric utility, and most recently sewer and water. And beyond that, we're also a cooperative. We do have traditional territories associated with all those utilities, and this is our traditional telephone territory. A little hard to see, but parts of Henry County, Hancock County, Western Marion County, Hamilton County, a little bit of Madison County. Our traditional electric territory is a good portion of Hancock County, but also gets into Madison County, Hamilton County, little bits of Rush County, little bits of Henry County. And most recently, our new advent of the wet utilities and north central Hancock County. But beyond that, NineStar Connect has made a tremendous investment along with our subsidies and partnerships and build out a pretty vast fiber optic network across east central Indiana. We now offer services to homes and businesses in 10 counties. And really what that allows us to do is it puts out there a lot of embedded horsepower to really power NineStar Connect, not just from the communications perspective, but as a smart utility. Kind of the focus of my presentation is going to be on our electric utility network and kind of the IoT that we have in-house of that. The electric utility network, NineStar's journey really begins at that substation transformer. That's where we take power delivery from our another cooperative, Wabash Valley Power Association. We take delivery of power there and we distribute it along our lines and along our distribution transformers to that good old meter on the side of the house. And not too many people think of this as an IoT device, but this is our IoT network. A little bit of the history of that kind of electric meter being a IoT type device, it's not a new technology. AMR or automatic meter readings have been around since the mid-'80s. They weren't that smart, so maybe we'll call them a sharp meter. They can only communicate one way, and they can only really communicate usage, and that may not even be centralized communication. It may still require somebody to drive by that and have a little antenna hanging out their window and getting that meter data. In 2005, AMI started out, and that offered a lot more potential with real-time usage, power quality, so your voltage, your highs, your lows, outage and tamper reporting, and even remote disconnect. But the big point in that is AMI offered two-way communications. Just from the NineStar perspective, kind of the difference between an AMI and an AMR system. An AMR system really only affected, sorry it's a little blurry, billing and metering. Those are really only two people that could use that AMR system. Where from a company perspective on an AMI system, that touches many more departments: engineering, operations, planning, key accounts, dispatch, and we'll kind of get into some demand management here in a minute. So, these electric meters that we have out there, they contain a communications module. It happens to be a company called Tantalus that has built that module into these meters and allows all meters to kind of form a really robust, resilient mesh network. Each one of these meters is allowed to connect to another 105, initially 105 other meters. So they could all talk and share data and pass that along. The last couple of years, since we've actually been deploying these, that jumped through some firmware and hardware and software updates. Now that's 210 points. They've doubled that. And in doing so, they went from 90% utilization of the hardware, the memory, the processor, down to 20%. So there's so much more room for growth in that space. It does operate in the 900 megahertz unlicensed spectrum, 908 to 912. So I said we get pretty good coverage distances, 3,000 to 4,000 feet. Initially, but like I said, with that new hardware that allowed us to connect to so many more endpoints, they actually had to shrink the antenna a little bit, so it shrunk us down to 2,000 to 3,000 feet of kind of association or effective range of them. This is kind of what all that smart meter and all that data is kind of aggregated into a dashboard for our entire meter system. This is kind of a graphical one. Some people like that. I'm come from kind of the engineering side of the house, so numbers and percentages is kind of what I live in every day. So, but it's the same data. Kind of diving in just a little bit deeper, you're kind of seeing you're sorting by these various columns in there. They're all reporting perfect. Sorry, I had to block out. I didn't think you really cared about the MAC addresses and meter IDs anyway. But down to individual meters. And all these happen to say reporting perfect. We do get some that don't report at all. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Outage events, days service orders where a builder is going, so a temporary meter. So for like when you're building a house, they have a temporary meter out there. It may be going permanent that day, so that generates an outage when that transition happens. Or kind of the most recent, some kind of nefarious individuals decided that maybe the best way to break into a house to bypass all the security cameras and everything comes in their house is to actually just pry that meter off the house. And we've come across that enough so that our linemen now, they see a meter laying in the yard, they're to call the police first. So it's a little of our standard operating procedures. Diving even deeper, I said looking at the individual meter data. This is a big one, a customer for that voltage reading up there customer reports, maybe dim lights or surges or anything else like that. While that customer calls in or communicating, emails in, we can kind of walk them through what's exactly going on that line side of the meter right there. The power quality management is one that we set, that we want to be notified if the minimum voltage drops below that or the maximum voltage, conversely, drops on the other side of it. We can see the last outage information for that particular member and the last voltage sag and voltage swell. This is where it kind of gets fun. I like graphs. I know I said I was more of a numbers person, but this is a usage graph from actually a single meter. He's one of our members, and this gentleman has installed a fairly sizable solar array at his home, at least by residential standards. So all the blue is when he's actually consuming power from NineStar Connect, and all this green is where his solar array is actually generating power, and NineStar is purchasing that power back on our membership, or from our member. He's putting it back on the grid. Up at the top, it's a little hard to see, but the delivered, received, and then the net meter, so his net usage throughout that whole day. Now what the customer can see, this is from our perspective right here looking at this. The customer is able to see this through our application called Smart Hub. He's able to see his usage, and like I said, this happens to be a solar customer that we're purchasing power back from him. It's really just a lot more transparency and a member not just getting their bill every month and just taking our word that that's what they owe. They're able to see their usage and ultimately possibly control their usage. One of the things that certainly really affects NineStar tremendously is this base load versus peak load. If you yourself there are a 5 kW an hour user, and as are you, you're a 5, well collectively you have 10 kilowatts an hour that we need to have power on supply for. So that's the base load. Now all of a sudden 5, 6 o'clock rolls around, and now you go up to a 20 kW. He stays at a 5. Now we're using 25 kW of power, and that's the peak. And that's really the best thing I can do between base load and peak load, is it kind of looks like that. We have to have enough power, at least in reserve, and that may be kicking on new generation stations called peaking plants, just to meet that surge of when everybody gets home. I would probably really wish, and I'm sure our VP of Engineering and Operations wished our profile looked exactly like this, where we're dense or has a really good balance of industrial, commercial, residential load. So when all those industries and all those machines are turning during the day, they're keeping that base profile up. When the machines go off at 5 o'clock, all the residential customers are turning on all their appliances and everything else, and it's flattening that profile out. It's not nearly as big of a hit for them. But there are a few things we can do about it to curb that, and kind of a load control and demand response, peak shaving, profile flattening. Basically, and there's kind of behavioral based and technological based ones. Obviously, the behavioral based are a little harder to manage, so the technological ones are much better. But both from the utility perspective and the consumer perspective, it's an opt-in thing, and this happens to be a load control module. And you can think about kind of at least the utility side of the load control is you're allowing the utility to cycle off some devices in your home in essence to try to lower that peak profile. You probably don't want them doing that to your TV, to miss 15 minutes out of every hour of your TV, or you maybe don't want them to do that to your microwave or your stove when you're cooking dinner. But there are some things you can think about that people don't mind getting shut off for 15 minutes, and it's not that dramatic of effect. They're AC units, they're HVACs. They're hot water heaters. Pool pumps, a lot of power. Maybe you don't need to use your pool pump, maybe not need to circulate between 5 and 9 p.m. Agricultural irrigation systems, if you're able to shut those down and transfer those more into the base load or off-peak. And then kind of on the consumer perspective, that you can change people's behavior, and when they get home, maybe they won't start their laundry until 8:30, 9 o'clock. But it's a lot easier to let the technology do it, to where I can go in, load up my washer, load up my dryer, walk away from it, and maybe even just set it right now with a clock or a timer that turns on at 9 p.m. But maybe in the future you can get price signals from the utility that, hey, NineStar just went off peak, start up that washer and dryer. Dishwasher, another one. He had, I think we already saw in a presentation, the Nest thermostat. And kind of the ultimate, the Tesla home battery pack, to where you can store or charge all those batteries off peak, and then start the discharge process to flatten that profile when you're on peak. Ultimately, it gets to, on anything, what's in it for me, to adopt it. For our membership, it's really visibility and ultimately control of their usage. We have new billing options available, time of use, that allows a member to pay less for their power than would be normal when it's off peak and pay more when it's on peak, and rewarding individuals who are able to shift some of their consumption to the off peak. Prepay billing, a lot like putting gas in your car. When your gas in your car gets to empty, you fill it back up. Same thing with prepay metering. You buy a certain amount of power, you get a text message or an email alert when it dips below, you put $10, $100, whatever you want, fill your meter back up. And then a lot of the integration of devices behind the meter, some of those technologies like the washer and the dryer, integrating those. For NineStar, we're able to view real-time grid data and outage response. We're able to be proactive in our grid management. We have integrated centralized management and grid control to where instead of being out on the line and responding, basically waiting for the member to call in and say, hey, I'm having a power problem, we've seen that meter drop out and we're dispatching linemen before you can even get on the phone. And ultimately, transparency to our membership, having that trust that when the bill they send them each month, that is actually their consumption. And I came across an article this weekend when I was actually putting this together that I thought it really had a good thing that kind of hit me pretty good. And it's from Sue Kelly. She's the CEO of American Public Power Association. And you're more than welcome to read this, and I don't know if these slides are going to be available, but I really like her second paragraph here as it relates to NineStar. That community-owned, not-for-profit public power utilities are well-positioned to respond to these changes in the industry, as we are answerable to our communities and not to remote shareholders. But we need to capitalize on our strengths. We can no longer stay in our comfort zone on our side of the meter, providing basic electric service and sending bills. We must diversify the menu, develop new rate designs to handle increased demands on our distribution grids, adapt to changing customer preferences, and prove we can be our customers' trusted energy advisor. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Our final speaker is Chris Baggett, which many of you, I'm sure, know of Chris. Chris is the founder and CEO of Cluster Truck, but he's probably Indiana's most favorite or famous serial entrepreneur with such companies as Exact Target, Compendium, and Tyner Farms. Many of his businesses are here in Hancock County. And he's got lots to talk about today about how technology is the engine behind everything that he does. I just found out that Cluster Truck, maybe some of you know about them in Indianapolis, but they're also now in Bloomington, Columbus, Kansas City, Denver, and Cleveland. Minneapolis in 18 days. So here's Chris Baggett.
Started Exact Target pretty much at the same time. She worked for me for several years, and I think one of the reasons she invited me here is because I'm not very smart, I'm not well educated, I'm not an engineer, I cannot write a line of software code. And I think to make this applicable to you, right, and most of us here work for companies or organizations, right, and as you sit here and say, how do I do this, right, what's in it, how do I apply this, right, okay, Uber's great, so what, And my tiny, tiny little gift is the ability to figure that out. And I do that by always questioning authority. I'm very annoying, and I don't believe anything anybody tells me. I was always the kid, why? Shut up, because I said so. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. And one of my favorites, John, where are you? John just teed me up so perfectly for this, because one of my favorites is this whole feeding the world, right? You know, the United Nations came out 20 years ago and made this prediction for 2055 about how many people, and man, if I'm in the chemical business, that is the greatest piece of news I ever heard, because it rationalizes and justifies everything that I do, right? But as a person who questions authority, I don't believe that, right? Price of corn is going down. There's a global glut. 40% of all corn goes to ethanol, right? Nobody's going hungry. We make 8,000 calories per person when we only need to consume 1,800 calories. So where is the rationalization and the truth? I want everyone to Google a phrase, not now, called sub-replacement fertility, right? And what you'll see is a map. Sub-replacement fertility is how many people do I need to have babies in order to even keep even with the population, right? And you need 2.1 babies per woman, in some countries a little more because of mortality, just to stay even, right? There is not a place on the planet that is keeping up with that except a tiny little corner of Central Africa that is even keeping up with replacement. So and again, I'm only saying this to say, question everything you're told. Question every truth you believe you know. I'm so happy Mike made it because I have a present for him. This is Tyner Pond maple syrup. I love my relationship with NineStar. It's beautiful because you can actually pick up the phone and call somebody or email somebody. And on Tyner Pond Farm, we have these beautiful maple trees that happen to be on Mike's property and underneath power lines. And every year they have to come out, or every couple of years they have to come out and groom it. And this year they're like, you know, F it, we're just going to cut these trees down. And I'm like, no. I need these as part of the economy of my farm. We're going to make maple syrup. And the arborist, you know, that Mike hired promised everyone that there is no effing way this is going to make maple syrup, right? Is that arborist in the room? Anyone? Okay, sorry. Yeah, but yeah. But that's the truth, right? The truth is there's a college-educated, Purdue-degreed arborist that says these are not maple syrup trees. They will not make maple syrup. So the judgment of a productive tree is a 40-to-1 ratio, 40 gallons of sap to get 1 gallon of maple syrup. And I tapped 5 of those trees this year, and I got exactly a 40-to-1 ratio from trees that would not, and this is my gift to you, it's delicious. Next year, we're going to spend about $100,000 investing in tapping trees all over the county, and we'll be selling to Lincoln Square Pancake, among others, and we'll hire 5 or 6 people to be in the maple syrup business. So part of that is question everything. The second thing is to be really, really data curious, right? We talk about data, and you look at data as big data, but we all have data in our businesses, and we just have to keep digging and digging and digging. My team brought me a list the other day for Cluster Truck, and if you don't know the Cluster Truck concept, we're a delivery-only kitchen that we make about 130 different things. So it's kind of modeled on Google's Cafeteria or Cheesecake Factory, but it's a scratch kitchen, raw ingredients. We make all our own stocks. Obviously, most of the proteins come from Tyner Pond. When we're in Denver, we're working with whoever the Tyner Ponds are of Denver or Kansas City. So very much about stimulating local economies and feeding people quickly. What are our top 5 selling items? And they bring me this list. Here it is, the breakfast burrito. Okay, what are we going to do with this? All right, well, let's have an extension of the breakfast burrito. We'll have more bacon, and we'll add chorizo, and all these things to make this heartier, right? And the next biggest thing was the burrito bowl, and the next thing was the taco salad, right? And they're bringing these, and they're having all these modifiers, and with the burrito especially, everyone had this mental image that these were men and hearty, because it's a pretty hefty burrito. But the idea of data curiosity is, let's dig deeper. What's next? What's next? Well, we can modify the breakfast burrito, right? So we modify the breakfast burrito. What are the biggest modifiers? Remove bacon. Huh, okay. Now tell me about the taco salad. Well, the taco salad, when I get my taco salad, I load it up with seasoned ground beef and maybe some sausage and, pulled pork and, but the modifiers all are removing meat, have nothing to do with meat, right? So we're digging into all these 3 items, and the more we peel back the layer, we realize, man, we're selling to vegetarians, right? And that now influences the fact that we've launched a whole new vegetarian concept within Cluster Truck
to feed those vegetarians. But if they just would have brought me this burrito and gone with their original plan saying, yeah, we sell a lot of burritos, let's beef these up, we wouldn't have gotten to that answer. So all of us can do this, just dig deeper into data. I was going to set my timer, Jill, but am I over 15 minutes yet? I'm watching my clock over here at 5:45 and not helping me. So another truth I was told was you can't deliver hamburgers, right? Like, why is pizza still 90% of all food delivery? The reason pizza is because pizza can taste tolerable after an hour, right? A hamburger cannot. Internet of Things, that was a cash register ring at Tyner Pond Farm. Somebody just bought a bag of beef. Anyway, so that was a challenge we wanted to make. So the question was, why can't I get a hamburger delivered to me that's going to be good? And I was talking to a bunch of people and thinking about the problem. And what I came to was, when you call a pizza place and you order a pizza, or you push the button and order a pizza, the pizza place makes the pizza right there. They make it, right? They don't have any concept where the delivery person is. There's no coordination between the cooking of the pizza and, there's another one. And sorry, that's probably obnoxious. How many of you are Tyner Pond customers? All right, not enough. Let's go. We're going to talk about food from Castleton here. Come on. I got a beautiful chicken sandwich place that I can see from here. Yeah, that's part of it too. Anyway, so the problem is that there's no coordination between cooking of the pizza and where the delivery person is, right? And that's an Internet of thing, right? It's obvious, right? If I knew where the driver was, and I knew how far he was away from the kitchen, and I knew how long it takes to make a pizza, let's not start cooking the pizza until the driver is 6 minutes away from the kitchen, right? Then the pizza is going to be hot and fresh and delivered to your house, right? So that's the simple premise behind Cluster Truck, which is on its way to being a multi-billion-dollar global organization. It's phenomenal. But I only say that to say these simple things of just like ask questions all the time. Probe, probe, probe. Look at your data, and don't trust anything anybody tells you until you can prove it to yourself. And that's how you'll get into this. The next thing we looked at was the gig economy, right? So when we were starting to formulate our ideas around Cluster Truck, it was sort of 2015, early 16. Travis Klapernick had just been on YouTube abusing a driver. And there was a lot of negative press around this gig economy and how exploitive it is, right? So we thought, okay, what are the problems with the gig economy, and how do we take food delivery, which is the worst job in the food delivery or food economy or gig economy, right? Those poor people turn over literally every 2 weeks. Grubhub spends more money on recruiting drivers than they do marketing to customers because it's a miserable, terrible job where it's impossible to make any money. You have to get the order on your phone, you have to drive to a restaurant, you have to get out of your car, go into a restaurant. Everybody in that restaurant hates your guts, right? You're a customer, right? I'm here, I took the trouble to come. You ever go someplace where you're standing and waiting and somebody picks up the phone and starts talking on the phone to another customer? You're like, dude, I'm here. So the customers hate those people. The employees don't make an extra nickel, right? The owner might like that extra money, but the employees don't make any money for this extra work. So there's this lack of dignity, right? This really degrading aspect of it. Then they finally get the food. How is it packaged? Is it designed for delivery? Take it back to the car, drive to the customer, bring it up to the house, bring it up to the apartment, hand it to the customer. The customer's waiting an hour and a half. The customer's angry. You're the front line of offense on this. Just a terrible, terrible job. I think about my own experience, getting pizzas to my house, right? My kids will order pizzas, then they disappear. And I'm sitting there watching Jeopardy, minding my own business. The doorbell rings. Who's at the door? Hey, come on in. It's 5-6 minutes of a transaction for that. I'm running out. Is that 5 minutes in or out? 5 minutes left. Okay. So, all right. So here's how we applied Internet of Things. Jill, do I have a marker?
Right there.
So we looked at it this way. And again, I know nothing about software. My favorite thing that everyone in my company hates is, how hard can this be? Come on, guys. How hard can this be? But that's the question you have to always ask too, right? What do I want to do? So if I have a system where orders come in, so all of these are people's orders. And what I want to do is create a great job for gig economy people. So first of all, I need only one kitchen, so they only have to go back to one place. I need them to never get out of their car. so that the customer has to meet the car. So our competitors all charge a delivery fee, we charge no delivery fee, you track it like you track an Uber, and you come and meet the car. Imagine Mozzie's, if I got out of my house and went to the end of my driveway, so the driver's just handing me the pizza instead of that person coming out of the car. Can you imagine how many jobs per hour they could get done? Right? Simple stuff. Why does the driver get out of the car? I don't know. But that's costs everyone money and time. So when your order comes into a system, I know a couple things. I know that you live 5 minutes from my kitchen, and I know that your food's going to take 5 minutes to make, right? So that's 10 minutes. What that does for me is give me 20 minutes where I don't have to do anything, right? I don't have to touch you, because I'm not going to cook your food until 5 minutes from the driver coming out. Because I know that 30 minutes is going to be very satisfactory. I'm sorry, I think I might have missed that point. I know you're going to give me 30 minutes, and if I can get you food in under 30 minutes, you're going to be really happy. So then I have drivers all over the place, right? And I see this guy, Ken. And Ken is 2 minutes from making a delivery, 5 minutes from there back to the kitchen. So here's a 5-minute order that I'm going to drop and give to Ken. So he's got job 1. This is job 2. So I've given him this job 2 that's going to be 5 minutes out, 5 minutes back. Here's the order you just placed. I'm dropping that one. 5 minutes out, 5 minutes back. I can manage all this through artificial intelligence and an algorithm that I didn't build or I didn't invent. I just said, how hard can it be? And it's hard, but not that hard. But I've given Ken 3 jobs in about 20 minutes, right? In the gig economy for food delivery, a driver's lucky to get 1.2 jobs an hour done. Ken is a real person. Ken made $89,000 last year. Because these drivers don't have to get out of cars, we get a lot of moms that'll come in and just drive lunch, which is our busiest day part. We'll get moms that drive with their kids in car seats, and just drive lunch and make $25,000, $30,000 a year, right? And we've gone from creating the worst gig economy job in the world to the best gig economy job. And we know that if we have lots and lots of drivers that are happy, we're going to give great service to the customer. So we think of the driver as our core constituent. So anyway, this is just an example of how do you apply data and questioning authority to help your business, if that makes any sense. Done? Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Claire's got a message she wants to convey. Come on up, Claire. Yeah, we do. We need mic you. Sorry. Claire's with Clear Object, and she's going to talk about the design thinking workshop. And once again, I want to thank Hancock Health for their scholarship as well.
Thank you, Jill. All right. As mentioned, my name is Claire Maher. I'm with Clear Object. I'm the IoT Market Channel Development Manager there. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about that design thinking consultative workshop that was mentioned at the beginning. So we mentioned there are sheets in the middle of your table here. And what that's about is kind of Clear Object. What we do is we work to design and enable solutions that are custom to your business problem to connect your product and your company to the Internet of Things. And the way that we do this involves kind of helping you get out of your own way initially. A lot of the time, our big ideas that would lead us to an IoT solution end up kind of stalling because we think that we're constrained by stack technology or box solutions or systems that we already have in place within our organization that don't have the capabilities that would enable your idea. So at Clear Object, part of our solution development process is to go through a design thinking workshop. What that is a workshop tailored specifically to your business problem, or as we call it, your business opportunity, and around the data feeds that you have or that you would like access to that might solve the problem that you face. That's stopping you from having a fully connected solution, connected product, and connected company. So today, in partnership with Hancock Regional Health, we are offering 2 design thinking scholarships for these workshops to 2 of the companies that are present today in the room. So what these sheets of paper are kind of the application per se, and we're going to ask that you fill out those simple prompts to just give us some of the information behind what it is we could potentially build a workshop around for you. We're going to ask you to leave those at your table. We will be collecting those and drawing a winner later, and we will follow up with you via email if you receive one of those scholarships, and work to schedule with you your personalized design thinking workshop. So if anyone has any questions about that, feel free to find myself or anyone in a Clear Object shirt. We're also seated on the way out where you registered. We have some people waving in the back as well. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have about that. We would like to thank everyone, especially NineStar, for hosting us today. And hopefully you guys all had a good time, feel inspired to apply, and get kind of kick-started on what your IoT initiative could be. Thank you very much.